What have you got yourself into? Good morning. Token cat. So today I thought I would give you 5 tips for a small or medium-sized garden in the suburbs or town where space is a premium. So here we go. Tip number 1, always go for height. So if you are limited on space, one thing you'll generally have is plenty of fences or walls. And it is always worth using those to grow things up. In the UK, there are 3 major climbers that I would recommend for this, for growing up vertical walls. So we have clematises, honeysuckle. So there's a clematis here, crunch, crunch, crunch. Clematises, honeysuckle, which is just here, and the other one is jasmine. On this side, what we've done is we've actually attached the trellis to the fencing, and that way the climbers are going to climb up and flower, and you can see that one of these clematises is currently in flower here. Here we've actually used freestanding trellis, so we've got posts with the trellis on all the way along to give us some screening. You can see here the jasmine, it's a pink jasmine in flower. We've used climbing roses, honeysuckles, got a gap here which should be filled, more honeysuckle down here. Planting doesn't just have to be limited to flowering plants. Here what I've done is I've used the back of the shed and I've put some wire that's plasticated on some loops here, very simply, on the shed, and what I've grown here are blackberries and sunberries, basically any kind of climber or runner style fruit. You can also do, if you wanted to, things like pear and apple, you can get like splayed ones. And there's a cat. Hello, you want to be in the video? He's like, I'm not going to face the camera, but I will try and be in every shot with my bottom. Helpful. Thank you. You just wink at me. Tip number 2, container planting. I would say if you've got a really small space, even if it's a balcony, container planting is your answer. You can have fancy pots like these. I've got some fuchsias in these. You can go for perennial planting, you can go for annual planting in these. As many of you have seen in my previous videos, I love a sempervivum. And, oh, here's a cat again. Or a succulent, so in sunny spots these can do really well. You can even have container water features. In this, I filled it with water and pond plants, and it's a nice wildlife oasis. So if you can't have a pond actually in your garden, you can have something like this. It gets very little algae in it. You could even have flowering irises and things like that growing in this. Another type of container planting you could do is vegetables. So I'm growing peas in containers. I'm trying to do leeks, not going so well, but my broccolis are doing really well. I've got purple sprouting broccoli and normal broccoli, green broccoli. The only thing you do have to remember with container planting is that you need to water more regularly, and you might need to fertilise that soil a bit more because there isn't the opportunity for the plants to get their roots further down if they need extra nutrients or water. So that's just one thing to remember. Tip 3. I have become a huge fan of raised beds, like this one which is growing my fruit in, which you can watch a video of above. They not only allow you to weed and access it more easily, it's generally easier than having to try and reach down on the ground, but they also allow you to contain plants that otherwise would be quite rampant. So I've got 2 plants in here that probably, if I put into the soil, would be ridiculous. Raspberries are notorious for spreading all over the place, but in a raised bed I can control them somewhat. And the other one is actually mint. And strawberries, actually. You can see here the strawberries are taken over. I've got loads of fruit, which is brilliant. You don't have so much issues as you do with container planting in terms of watering, because obviously there's much more soil in raised beds. It's much easier for you to weed, particularly if you've got any issues with your knees, because it's all kind of at knee height already. So you can sit on the side and weed, or you can lean over and get to the things at the back. So tip number 3 is looking at getting some raised bedding. I've seen some other really good use of raised bedding, which is where you just build up the raised beds like this, but instead of filling it all with soil, you actually put your pots behind it. So they don't have to be pretty pots, but you can put all your pots behind it and you can get some really lovely planting. And that can be a really good way of getting things in the right height order, because at the beginning plants can be quite small and then they grow and they get bigger, and you can shift around the pots accordingly. And you can also mean you can vary the planting every year. Tip number 4, zoning your garden. Often you'll inherit a garden that might already have obvious beds in it. Sometimes you might get blank canvas. The biggest tip I would give is to make sure that you think about separating sections out. Now, when I designed this garden, which was kind of a blank canvas, I did kind of think about it. I think if in retrospect, I probably would have done it more. But what you want to do is you want to give yourself manageable chunks, because even in a small garden, there's no way you want to spend all day weeding. So by having zones in your garden that you think, right, I'm going to tackle this today, I'm going to tackle that today, it does make it more manageable. And often you see a correlation with the fact that people with smaller gardens to medium gardens generally live in cities where they might have to be in jobs for quite long hours. So they might not have the time to be out in their garden lots. So that's what I've done here. So I've got the zone at the back that I would consider separate from this bed here. Then I have my pond, my rockery, and I have a cottage bed that runs all the way along there, and I have another bed that runs along there. And these zones do mean that when I'm maintaining my garden, it feels manageable, but it also feels like I have lots more in my garden. Because to me, it's like, you know, some people might have their west garden and the east garden. I have my perennial bed. I have my rockery. And for me, that makes it feel like there's a lot more space here. And when you're thinking about those zones, think about how much sun they get, how wet they are, and that can then help you in designing what kind of plants you want to grow. And tip number 5 is a completely biased tip, but it is totally my best. I think rockeries, maybe they used to be in the fashion, probably Victorian times, and some people that are still into gardening still do rockeries, but I think they're so underrated. The expense is mainly in the stone. And once you've got the stone lasts forever. If you don't like it, you can change it around. What you do with the rockery is you put all the rocks in place, and then you start to fill in the gaps with soil and you put plants in. Now, in a small garden, you don't need to have a very big rockery. In fact, we've actually extended this rockery over time. Just compare the number of plants that are in this rockery compared to maybe a perennial bed. So rockeries have very limited soil between the rocks. That means that the plants don't spread as far. Some of them will. Some of them are adapted to be able to spread. But they're much more easier to pull up. They don't have deep roots, very shallow roots. Weeding is super easy. And what you get is a great diversity in plant. They're generally relatively low height, but the rocks themselves create tiers, so you also can develop height with it. You could go for a much steeper rockery than the one we've got. And the diversity of colour and types of plant that you can get in such a small space means I think that rockeries are definitely something to invest in terms of a small garden or even a big garden, but I think they're completely underrated. So tip 1, go for height. Tip 2, container planting. Tip 3, raised beds. 4, create lots of zones of planting. And tip 5, get yourself a rockery. Thank you for watching and have a lovely day.